Void Miner, Trial of the Century. Prelude. The Dust Widow drifted along the edges of Saturn's rings, a lone speck of patched steel set against the sweep of frozen arcs. Her hull was tired, plates welded over welds, scars scored by years of grit and stone. She wasn't built for beauty, but for endurance, and in that way she had been a reflection of the man strapped into her pilot's chair. Arg sat forward, elbows braced on his knees, hands resting on the yoke, though he might as well have been holding the bones of a corpse. The ship wasn't his anymore. The seed had seen to that. It began as a vibration in his teeth, a resonance he tried to pass off as strain from long hours awake, but it spread down into the marrow of his arms, into the metal bones of the widow herself. A pulse, a thrum. Not sound, not light, but something deeper. Something that lived inside matter. And the widow responded. Every system hummed faintly. Screens flickered with symbols no human had ever etched. The containment cradle bolted near the aft bulkhead glowed where Kara had secured the fragments, their surfaces trembling with pale blue light. They answered the seed like struck chimes, the resonance rising to meet the pulse, threading through the hull. Arg ground his molars. "It's pulling us." From behind him, Kara's voice was quiet, clipped, dragged. He glanced at her reflection in the viewport glass. She stood rigid near the fragments, arms folded, her face lit unevenly by the glow. There was no fear in her features, not outright, but her eyes betrayed tension. Arg shoved the yoke forward. The widow's thrusters flared, kicking the nose aside, and for a heartbeat their trajectory bent away from Saturn's largest moon. Titan's ochre haze shifted in the viewport, but then the nav screen scrambled. Glyphs repaced human readouts, curves redrawn in alien arcs. The widow's course snapped back, perfect and inevitable. Titan loomed dead center once more. Arg snarled and slammed his fist against the console hard enough to rattle the housing. "Non-interference. Chains." Kara finally moved closer, one hand braced on the chair's back, the other resting against her stomach in that unconscious way she had picked up lately. She wasn't showing much yet, but Arg knew what that gesture meant. He felt his jaw tighten. The first trial had nearly killed them both, and that had only been 2 lives measured. Now it would be 3. The aliens didn't care. They had no concept of pregnancy. To them, Kara was still only one subject. The child inside her would be nothing but collateral. That knowledge burned Arg more than anything. The console flickered again, lines of descent profiles writing themselves across the screen in symbols older than human speech. Trajectories, angles, burn sequences. It was as though the widow had become a puppet, her strings pulled by a hand Arg couldn't reach. Kara's eyes tracked the data as if she could read it, though Arg knew she couldn't. "It doesn't matter how hard you fight. You know where this ends." He shook his head violently, gripping the yoke tighter. "We weren't ready the first time. We're not ready now." Her voice softened just a little. "We survived the first one." "Barely." The pulse through the hull deepened. The fragments throbbed like beating hearts. Titan filled more of the glass, its orange atmosphere glowing like a lantern behind the faint sheen of the rings. Arg let the yoke fall limp under his hands. His shoulders ached from the fight. He leaned back in the chair, breath hissing out between his teeth. Memories came unbidden. The first trial. He had been separated for Kara in those tunnels. The air so thick with static it felt like breathing dust. He had seen illusions that cut deeper than any blade. The faces of men he had left behind in the belt. Kara's figure turning away from him, abandoning him when he needed her most. The chamber had forced every fear of betrayal down his throat until he thought he'd choke on it. He remembered the crushing weight, the impossible climb, his body driven beyond breaking, and through it all, the cold pressure that watched, measured, judged. When the voice had spoken, metallic, detached, older than the stars, he had expected death. He had expected to be erased. Unstable, but viable. Those words still rattled in his skull when the air went quiet. He had staggered back to the widow with Kara, both of them changed, marked. His eyes still glowed faintly in the dark. His body carried a resilience he hadn't earned. Kara had been altered too, but she had never spoken much of it. He didn't have to ask. He could see it in her. That trial had nearly broken them. And then, months later, Kara had told him she was pregnant. Arg had never hated anything more than he hated the seed in that moment. Not because of what it had done to him, but because of what it might already be doing to the life she carried. Now here they were again, being dragged toward another trial, and the unborn child had no say. He closed his eyes for a moment, trying to shove the memory aside. What came instead was the sound of laughter, sharp, rough, echoing through patched corridors. The orphans. He saw them in his mind as they had been when he left, running drills with tools too heavy for their hands, practicing emergency seals on bulkheads, shouting orders at one another in voices too young for command. He had driven them hard, harder than was fair. But he had seen what happened to the weak in the belt. He hadn't raised them to be safe. He had raised them to survive. He could still hear Teo's voice carrying down the corridor, high and unsteady, but certain. Ariel barked corrections, Kerr cursing under his breath. They had started to sound less like frightened children and more like crew. And yet, leaving them had felt like abandonment all over again. Arg opened his eyes. Titan stared back, growing larger with every breath. If the seed broke him here, if he and Kara didn't come back, the orphans would be alone. Maybe they'd manage. Maybe they wouldn't. The thought clawed at his ribs worse than gravity ever could. The widow's alarms chirped. Atmospheric entry data scrolled across the screen. Glyphs burned into the navlog, incomprehensible but absolute. Kara lowered herself into the co-pilot's chair, buckling in. Her hands stayed tight over her stomach. She glanced once at him, her face calm but pale. "Whatever comes," she said quietly, "we go through it together." Arg didn't answer. His throat was too tight. The ship shuddered violently as Titan's upper atmosphere caught her skin. Fires licked across the viewport in streaks of orange and red, painting Kara's face in flame. The hull groaned, bolts rattling in their housings. Arg tightened his harness, his knuckles white on the yoke, though he knew it no longer mattered. The seed's hum rose into the steady roar, filling every bone in his body. The fragments pulsed like stars at the edge of his vision. Arg gritted his teeth, staring straight ahead into the haze. He whispered to himself, words that had no power but needed to be spoken. "Not this way." The widow plunged deeper, swallowed by Titan's clouds, and somewhere beneath, the trial waited. Chapter 1. Descent to Titan. The dust widow was never meant for skies. Her bones were cut from ore hauler stock, ribs braced against the vacuum, skin welded for the belt's collisions and silence. In space, she was steady, stubborn as stone. But in atmosphere, even Titan's thick, frozen soup, she'd become something else entirely. A rock thrown into fire. The hull screamed as friction caught her skin, fire streaking orange and red across the viewport. Arg gripped the yoke with his hands locked in white knuckles. His arms taut as steel cables. He wasn't guiding her. He was holding on, fighting for a say in where his ship went, even as he knew deep down that the widow no longer belonged to him. The seed had her. The pulse through the hole was unmistakable now. A resonance, not born of atmosphere, but of command. It thrummed through every panel, every jolt, every nerve in Arg's arm. The widow's thrusters fired in bursts that didn't match his inputs, angled them toward a descent curve Arg hadn't plotted. Titan's haze swallowed the stars. The great moon's upper cloud layers boiled orange-gray, dense with hydrocarbons, streaked with methane ice. Beneath that, storms the size of continents churned. A frozen ocean flipped upside down and left to rage in the sky. "Keep her steady," Arg said from the co-pilot's chair. Her voice clipped but calm. Arg bared his teeth, sweat streaking down his temple. "She's steady when I say she is." The hull jolted violently, a thunderclap echoing through the ship as if the widow herself laughed at him. Alarms wailed briefly, then cut out as the seed rewrote their code, erasing human warnings to replace them with a steady, inhuman hum. Arg slammed the heel of his hand against the console. "Son of a—" Kara reached across, steady fingers on his forearm. Her grip was cool, grounding. "It's not listening. You know that." He looked at her, really looked, and hated how steady she was. She wasn't calm because she trusted the seed. She was calm because she had accepted inevitability. That was worse. "You think I'm going to just sit here while it drags us under?" he growled. She didn't let go of his arm. "I think you'll burn yourself out fighting it, and it won't change where we end up." The ship lurched again, throwing Kara sideways in her harness. She caught herself, breath sharp, one hand reflexively pressing against her stomach. Arg's eyes snapped at the motion, his chest tightening. The child. He bit down hard enough on his tongue to taste blood. Wind shear slammed the widow broadside, buffeting her against the storm front. Titan's clouds weren't the thin wisps of Mars or the breathable swells of Earth. They were thick, heavy, crushing. Every gust carried weight, a tide of methane and nitrogen, pressing down like an ocean trying to tear the ship apart. Arg fought the yoke, but his muscles might as well have been pulling against mountain roots. The widow shifted, corrected herself, then held steady again. Not because of him, but because the seed wanted her so. He knew that truth, but he couldn't unclench his fists, couldn't let go. The viewport flashed with lightning, sheets of white fire curving through the haze. Thunder rolled, muted and massive, shaking Arg's ribs through the chair. In the strobing light, Titan's clouds looked alive, vast shapes moving in the fog, giants twisting slowly as though the whole sky were watching. Arg hated atmosphere. He hated the way it took control from him, replaced vacuum silence with chaos. In the belt, he could predict rocks, calculate paths, reshape survival with his own stubborn hands. But here, he was a leaf in a storm. And worse, he wasn't even in the storm alone. The seed's pulse matched the thunder, steady as a drumbeat. It guided the widow with mechanical certainty, cutting through chaos with intent. Intent. That was what burned him most. It wasn't chance dragging them down. It was will. Something older than humanity. Something that had already judged him once already, had weighed him and Kara, and branded them viable. Now it wanted more. The ship shook again, fire licking across the viewport. Kara braced herself. Her eyes narrowed, but her breathing steady. Arg couldn't help himself. "You're too calm." Her gaze flicked to him, sharp. "Would you rather I scream?" He almost said yes. Almost admitted that her calm felt like surrender. But the word stuck in his throat. Instead, he barked, "You weren't there when this ship," and cut himself off. She had been there. She had been there through every scar, every near break. She had endured just as much as him, and more, carrying life inside her now. He looked away, jaw tight. "You're too calm," he muttered again, softer. Kara didn't answer this time. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the groan of the hull and the steady pulse of the seed. Ark's mind betrayed him, pulling him backward. He saw the tunnel of the first trial, cold stone, impossible geometries, air so thick with static it felt alive. He remembered the illusion, Kara's face turning away from him, leaving him in darkness, voices of the dead clawing at his ears. He remembered weight crushing his chest, breath burning in his throat, his body driven to breaking. And then that voice, unstable but viable. The verdict had cut deeper than any blade. He had expected death. Instead he had been marked, rewritten. His eyes still betrayed him in the dark, glowing faintly. His blood carried strength that wasn't his own. Kara had been marked too. Together, they had walked out alive, but scarred. Now as Titan's haze clawed around the widow, Arg wondered what judgment would fall this time, and what it would mean for the child. The storm thickened. Visibility shrank until the viewport was nothing but boiling orange-gray, lit by sporadic lightning. Ice crystals scraped the hull like claws. Pressure alarms chirped again, muted by seed overrides. Arg leaned forward, eyes burning. "It's pulling us into something. I can feel it." Kara's voice was low. "You know what it is." He shot her a glance. "Don't." She didn't flinch. "Another trial." His grip on the yoke tightened until his hands ached. The word hung in the cabin like a death sentence. The widow bucked, her nose forced downward. Arg felt the shift in his gut as gravity bit, dragging them deeper. He tried once more to wrest control, shoving thrusters sideways, but the seed answered by killing his input completely. The console went dark for 3 heartbeats, then flickered back alive, reset, alien glyphs crawling across the screen. Course locked, descent vector fixed. Arg let out a sound halfway between a growl and a groan. He slumped back in his chair, eyes locked on the haze beyond the glass. "You ever get tired of being someone else's tool?" he muttered. Kara's hand tightened over her stomach, her jaw clenched, but her eyes didn't leave the storm. "Every day." That answer cut deeper than any silence could have. Lightning cracked again, illuminating the clouds in stark skeletal light. And for a moment, just a heartbeat, Arg thought he saw shapes in the storm below. Angles too sharp, curves too deliberate, buried beneath the haze. Not rock, not weather. Something else. He blinked, and the vision was gone. But the pulse of the seed quickened as though in answer. Minutes stretched into hours, or hours into minutes. Time bent under the storm. Arg's muscles ached from fighting controls that weren't his. Sweat soaked his back. Kara's breathing stayed steady, though he caught her flinch with every heavy jolt. And all the while, Titan's haze thickened, pressing them downward. The widow was no longer a ship in descent. She was prey being led by the caller. And Arg knew, in his bones, that what waited below was not random. It was built, placed, prepared. Another trial. The seed had judged them once. Now it would again. And this time, it wasn't just 2 lives at stake. It was 3. Chapter 2. The Chamber Revealed. The widow slammed through the last layers of Titan's haze like a stone falling into the sea. The ship's hull screamed with the strain. Fire stripped away in glowing ribbons as the friction eased and the orange-gray sky thinned. What came next wasn't relief. It was worse. The storm had no end. Beneath the high clouds came another deck of violence. Thick thunderheads of methane churned endlessly, lightning bleeding through in muted white arcs. It was like flying into a bruise that stretched across the world. Arg gritted his teeth, his harness biting into his shoulders as the ship shuddered under another blast of wind shear. His hands still gripped the yoke, though he knew it was an act of defiance more than control. The seed had its hold. Every thruster burn answered the alien pulse, not his command. Beside him, Kara's hands held the rail, her knuckles pale. She said nothing, but her jaw was set hard enough that the muscles stood out. She was holding steady, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she refused to give fear the dignity of voice. The storm parted just long enough to reveal Titan's surface below. Arg caught only a glimpse through the boiling haze, an endless sheet of ice and shadow, rigid and broken, stretching further than sight. Fissures cut deep scars into the crust, some steaming faintly, others silent black wounds. It wasn't a place for life. It wasn't meant to be. And yet, Arg squinted, leaning forward as another bolt of lightning split the clouds. For a heartbeat, the surface slid up in sharp white. And there, just there, he saw angles that didn't belong, too precise, too clean. A geometry no glacier or tectonic shift could carve. His chest went tight. There, he muttered. Kara's eyes flicked to him, then to the viewport. She saw it too. She didn't say anything, but her lips pressed thinner, a breath catching in her throat. The seed pulsed, deeper now, its rhythm steady as a drum beat through the hull. The widow's nose tilted of its own accord, descent vector aligned perfectly with the impossible geometry. No, Arg hissed. He shoved the yoke forward, trying to push them away, to angle them toward another stretch of ice, anywhere else. The widow didn't budge. The console flickered, symbols crawling across the screen, rewriting his resistance into compliance. The ship rolled, her nose locking on the coordinates. Kara's hand touched his forearm lightly, steadying. You can't steer away from it. Don't tell me what I can't do. Then look at it, she said, her voice quiet but sharp. You already know what it is. Ark's jaw ached from the clench. He didn't want to look, didn't want to give the thing the dignity of an acknowledgement. But Titan's haze peeled back under the widow's forced descent, and the sight left no choice. The fissures below weren't natural. They radiated outward from a central point, like cracks in glass spidering from a single blow. At the center sat something buried, vast and silent, an angular structure, its lines sharp enough to slice the horizon. It wasn't a building, not in any human sense. It was too wrong for that. Its surfaces seemed to shift depending on how he looked at them, some angles folding into others stretching too long, like geometry itself was being bent. Shadows didn't fall where they should, light bent around its edges. It was alien, unmistakably, terribly alien. And the seed was guiding them straight into it. The widow's landing thrusters fired, smooth and measured, far steadier than Arg would have managed in a storm like this. The ship slowed, trembling under the wind's fury, and lowered herself toward the ice. Arg fought every second of it, eyes darting to manual override, fingers stabbing at toggles, but the seed swept his commands away as fast as he issued them. When the landing struts touched ice, the impact rattled through his bones. The widow hissed, stabilizing. Her hull groaned, but she held. Silence fell inside the cabin, broken only by the faint hiss of systems cycling. Arg sagged back into his harness, his throat dry. He wanted to feel relief at landing, but what stretched out in front of him killed the thought. The structure dominated the horizon. It rose from the ice like a wound, a jagged geometry half buried but immense. Its angles glowed faintly from within, light seeping out in pulses that matched the seed's rhythm exactly. Fissures cut away from its base, steam rising where Titan's crust met its impossible skin. It wasn't sleeping. It was waiting. Kara unbuckled her harness slowly. The click of the latch sounded too loud in the cabin. She rose, hand brushing the console for balance. Her eyes never left the alien ship outside. "We're expected," she said quietly. Arg barked a harsh laugh, one with no humor in it. "Expected, like guests." Her gaze cut to him. "Like subjects." That word hit too close. Arg shoved his harness loose, rising with a grunt. His knees ached from hours locked tense, but he forced them steady. He crossed to the viewport, glaring at the structure. "I don't like the look of it." "You're not supposed to," Kara said, her voice flat. He turned to snap at her, but stopped. She wasn't mocking. She was stating a fact. And she was right. The fragments hummed in their cradle, their glow rising in sync with the pulses outside. The seed's resonance filled the ship until Arg felt it in his teeth. A deep vibration rolled through the ice, low and resonant, as though the structure were clearing its throat. The fissures surrounding it split wider, cracking open in sharp detonations that echoed through the storm. Chunks of ice fell away, swallowed into blackness below. Then the light grew. Lines of it traced across the structure's surface, flowing in patterns that defied his eye. Some bent at angles that made his vision swim. Others curved too slowly, like they stretched on forever. The central face of the structure began to shift. Not crumble, not collapse. Shift. Panels folded inward, surfaces sliding over one another like scales. Geometry rearranged itself in silence until a vast, dark aperture yawned open. A mouth. An entrance. The seed's hum settled into a steady, expectant rhythm. Arg's chest tightened. He glanced at Kara. She stood tall, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the black maw. Her hand brushed her stomach once more, instinctive and unspoken. But she didn't move back. "You're not walking in there," Arg said roughly. Her gaze flicked to him sharp. "You're carrying a life that doesn't matter to the seed. It won't change the trial. It never cared about us being ready, and it won't care about this." Arg swallowed hard. She was right. But the truth tasted like poison. Outside, the aperture widened further, light spilling along the fissures like veins. The storm howled above, but down here, the air grew unnervingly still, as if the structure drank the wind. The widow's systems went dark one by one. Consoles blanked, lights died. Only the hum of the seed and the glow of the fragments remained. The message was clear. Time to step out. Arg reached for his helmet, securing it with a snap. His throat felt tight in the recycled air. He checked his suit seals, fingers moving by habit. Kara moved beside him, strapping her own helmet into place. Her movements were steady, deliberate, no hesitation. Arg wanted to shake her, to demand she stay aboard, safe. But he knew there was no safety here. The trial had already begun, even if they hadn't stepped outside yet. He pressed his gloved hand against the hatch controls. They didn't respond to him. The seat answered instead, unlocking the seals with a heavy clunk. Cold vapor hissed into the cabin as the outer hatch slid open. Titan's air wasn't meant for human lungs, but his suit filtered it, stinging sensors with readings that fluctuated unnaturally. The alien structure warped even the atmosphere around it. Arg looked at Kara one last time. Her eyes, visible through the visor, glowed faintly with the same light he knew burned in his own. Neither of them spoke. Words had no place here. Together, they stepped down onto Titan's ice. The ground trembled faintly, as if acknowledging their presence. Ahead, the alien aperture waited, black and vast, its edges growing into patterns that hurt to follow. Arg's gut clenched. His hand hovered near Kara's arm, not quite touching. "Ready?" he muttered. Her answer was quiet, but firm. "We don't get a choice." And together, with the storm boiling behind them and the seed pulsing like a second heartbeat in their chests, they walked toward the chamber that had opened just for them. Chapter 3. Initiation. The air inside the chamber was colder than the ice outside. Arg felt it the moment his boots crossed the threshold, a temperature that wasn't natural, but imposed, as if the structure itself exhaled something meant to remind flesh it didn't belong here. The suit's sensors scrambled, readings jumping between extremes, none of them making sense. The black aperture swallowed them whole, its edges glowing with those shifting patterns that made his vision ache. For a few steps, Arg tried to track them, lines curving, then folding in on themselves, bending into impossible angles. By the time his visor corrected, his stomach was already knotted, as though his body recognized a truth his mind couldn't parse. Kara walked at her side, her posture rigid, every step deliberate. Her breathing filled the comms, steady but sharp. She didn't speak. Neither of them did. There was nothing to say. The aperture sealed behind them without a sound. Arg spun, instinctively reaching for the closing seam, but by the time he turned it was already gone. Just black wall, smooth and seamless, as if there had never been an opening at all. His fist slammed against the surface. The impact echoed dully through his gauntlet, a vibration that traveled up his arm but gave him nothing. The wall didn't so much as tremble. "Trapped," he muttered. Kara's voice was level, almost too calm. "It was never going to let us leave." He hated her calm, hated how it mirrored the truth he didn't want to admit. The fragments in the widow's cradle had hummed the same way before. Resonance. Command. They were here because something wanted them here. The notion that they had walked of their own accord was a lie. Arg turned back. The chamber stretched ahead, its walls not quite walls, more like surfaces cut from shadow and bent light. His eyes slid over them, struggling to hold focus. Some parts seemed far away, others too close. The floor pulsed faintly beneath his boots, like standing on the skin of something alive. He clenched his teeth. "I don't like this." "Neither do I," Kara said. She didn't slow her pace. They walked for what felt like minutes or hours. Time had no weight in the chamber. The further they went, the less Arg trusted his own senses. His visor gave conflicting readouts. Some panels told him the chamber was 2 meters wide. Others said 20. His depth perception wavered, distances stretching or compressing without reason. The silence was worse. No hum of the widow's systems, no groan of storm-wrecked ice. Not even the sound of their own steps carried properly. Their boots struck the surface, but the sound came delayed, bent, warped, as though distance itself had been twisted. Arg's breath rasped in his ears. Then the light changed. Faint lines traced out across the chamber walls, glowing pale blue. They weren't symbols, not in any language Arg knew, but they were deliberate. Patterns ran like veins, branching and splitting, only to curl back in on themselves. He tried to follow one, his eyes narrowing, but the line bent on itself endlessly. It had no start, no end. And then the voice came. It didn't echo. It didn't need to. It was everywhere at once. Not sound, but vibration. A resonance that lived inside Arg's bones, vibrating his teeth, thrumming in the marrow of his skull. His body recognized it instantly, in the same way his blood recognized oxygen. The same voice that had spoken at the end of the first trial. Clarity is the measure. The words were not words, but the meaning was undeniable. Cold, measured, detached. Arg froze in place, fists curling, chest heaving. His throat went tight. Kara stopped beside him, her visor turning toward him slightly. Did you hear? Yes, Arg spat. His voice cracked in his comms. I heard it. His pulse hammered. The memory of the first trial pressed down like stone. Illusions, weight, and the impossible judgment that had carved into his bones. He had thought he'd buried it, left it behind. But here it was again. Clarity is the measure. The chamber's lights pulsed in rhythm with the words, veins of blue crawling outward across the walls that weren't walls. Arg snarled. What the hell does that mean? The voice didn't answer. The floor shifted. At first, Arg thought it was an illusion, the same tricks of perception that had haunted him since they entered. But then the ground beneath his boots buckled, rising slightly, while Kara staggered back, the floor sinking under her. Arg lunged toward her, hand outstretched. Kara! Their gloves brushed fingertips, catching for an instant. Then the chamber itself tore them apart. Walls slid down between them, seamless, silent, black as the void. They didn't grind like stone. They folded like liquid. A surface melting and reforming until Arg's outstretched hand hit nothing but cold wall. Kara! He bellowed, slamming his palm against the barrier. Her voice cut through his comms, ragged but strong. Arg! He pounded the wall again, but it gave him nothing. The surface swallowed his strikes, as if he were hitting smoke. Kara! I'm here, her breath echoed in his headset, sharp, quick. She was close, meters at most, but already it felt like light years. Arg pressed his helmet against the wall, straining as if sheer force of will could pierce it. Stay where you are. Don't move. I don't think it cares where we move, she snapped back. As if to prove her right, the chamber shifted again. The wall rippled, and Arg's stomach dropped. The floor beneath him bent forward, pulling him down a slope that hadn't been there a moment before. He dug his boots in, trying to resist, but the surface carried him forward like a conveyor belt. No, he clawed at the walls, reaching for the place Kara's voice had come from. But the surface slid slick under his gloves. The voice returned, low and execrable. Clarity is the measure. The words shook the chamber, reverberating inside his skull until his vision blurred. Clarity, Arg hissed, spitting the word like a curse. His boots lost purchase. He slid forward, carried deeper into the chamber, away from Kara's voice. Her cry echoed through his headset one last time, raw and sharp. Arg! Then the calm cut. Silence fell, and Arg was alone. The slope leveled suddenly, spitting him out into a new space. He staggered, catching himself on unsteady legs. His visor flickered, momentarily blind before reorienting. The chamber around him was different, larger, the walls carved in ways that made no sense. Some angles folding back into themselves, others stretching out too far. The light crawled in patterns, shifting in ways his brain couldn't follow. He was alone. No Kara, no voices. Only the trial and its measure. Clarity. The word pulsed again, threading through the chamber like a heartbeat. Arg straightened, fists clenched, chest heaving. His eyes burned with a faint glow, the mark of the first trial. He stared into the impossible geometry and forced the words past his teeth. Then let's see what you mean. Chapter 4. The Perception Trial Begins. The chamber breathed. Arg couldn't hear it, couldn't see it, but he felt it. A slow expansion in the walls, a contraction beneath his boots, as if the space itself inhaled and exhaled around him. The air in his suit rasped loud against his ears, amplified by the comms that carried no one else's voice anymore. He was alone. The silence was worse than the storm. At least storms were honest. They could try to kill you, and you could feel their teeth. Here, the danger was quiet, hidden in the curve of shadows, in the lines that bent wrong, in the surfaces that refused to stay still. Arg steadied his breathing, forcing it down into rhythm. The panic was there, clawing under his ribs, but panic didn't keep you alive. Clear head, clear eyes. That was what kept a man breathing. The voice's words still rattled in his bones. Clarity is the measure. He spat into the inside of his visor, though the gesture was meaningless. Clarity? Fine. Let's see your damn test. The chamber shifted in answer. The floor rippled like water. Arg's boots sank slightly, then held. The surface hardened beneath him again. He crouched instinctively, hands reaching for balance against the wall, only for the wall to twitch away. Not move, not slide, just twitch, like a muscle spasm. Arg's heart thudded once, hard. He snatched his hand back. The wall returned to stillness, smooth, black, untouched. His visor flickered. Rangefinders pinged the chamber, sending out a burst of light, and came back with nonsense. Distance, 2 meters, then 40. Then negative readings, as if the beam had fallen into a hole. Shit, Arg muttered. He tapped the side of his helmet, resetting sensors. They corrected, steady again. But the numbers weren't trustworthy. He could feel it. The seed's voice had told him the measure. Clarity. His eyes would lie. His instruments would fail. If he wanted to walk out of here alive, he'd have to know the difference between illusion and truth without leaning on tools. The chamber darkened. Light crawled across the floor, thin lines glowing pale blue, then split in 3 directions, etching paths that stretched into black. 3 corridors. No markings, no clues. Only choice. Arg swore under his breath. He hated choices made blind. In the belt, you didn't jump a line without knowing where it tethered. Out here, one wrong move could mean airless death. And this was worse. Clarity, he growled. That's what you want, isn't it? Fine. He turned slowly, visor sweeping the 3 corridors. They looked identical. Black walls, faint blue lines, surfaces that bent light strangely. But as his eyes lingered, he began to notice differences. The left corridor seemed shorter than the others, but the more he stared, the longer it stretched, vanishing into haze. The middle corridor shimmered faintly, as if heat warped the air. Except Titan was cold enough to kill heat on contact. The right corridor looked steady, straight, but every time he blinked, the angles shifted slightly. None of them were real. Arg clenched his fists. He forced himself to breathe steady. He shut his eyes. Not to shut the place out, but to hear it, to feel it. The first trial had nearly killed him, but it had given him something too. The ability to trust his body under strain, to know when something was a lie. He leaned on that now. Boots steady on the floor. He took a step forward, not toward a corridor, but toward the center. The chamber vibrated, faint but sharp. A warning? Or approval? Arg opened his eyes again. The corridors shimmered differently now. The left one pulsed faintly at the edges, light curling in too perfect rhythm. A lure. The middle flickered like mirage heat bending wrong. The right. The right still looked wrong, but the wrongness didn't move. He set his jaw. Fine. Right it is. He stepped forward. The corridor swallowed him whole. The moment his boots crossed the threshold, the space behind him sealed. No sound, no seam. Just gone. He didn't bother to turn back. There would be nothing there. The walls pressed close, but not close enough to touch. His visor read distances that shifted with every step. 1 second, they were meters away. The next, centimeters. Arg ignored the numbers. He focused on his breathing, the rhythm of his boots. 1 step, another, another. The corridor bent left, then right. He lost sense of direction. His HUD spun, compass markers flashing, then glitching into alien glyphs. Figures, he muttered. Light pulsed ahead, not bright. Faint, steady, like the glow of a lamp through fog. Arg kept walking, his shoulders squared, eyes narrow. Then the walls began to whisper. It wasn't sound, not really. It was like the air itself pressed against his helmet, vibrating in tones too low for human ears. But the meaning slipped through anyway, the way a nightmare slipped into waking thought. Voices. He heard Kara's voice first. Arg, don't. His chest tightened. He looked over his shoulder, knowing it was a lie. The corridor behind him was black, empty. The whisper came again, sharper this time. You can't save me. He gritted his teeth, looking forward. The glow ahead pulsed faintly. He walked faster. The whispers multiplied, other voices now. Men he'd mined with, dead years ago in belt accidents. Faces he'd carried, buried, abandoned. Their words clawed at him. You left us. You only ever think of yourself. She'll die out here, and it'll be your fault, too. His fists curled until his gauntlets creaked. They're lies, he hissed under his breath. His throat felt raw. The walls trembled faintly in response, as though they enjoyed his denial. The corridor widened abruptly. Arg stumbled into a chamber larger than the last, but still warped. Angles bent into infinity. Light crawled like veins across the walls, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. In the center stood a figure. His stomach dropped. It was Kara, or something wearing her shape. Her visor was dark, but he could see her outline, her stance, the tilt of her head. She stood motionless, waiting. Kara, his voice cracked. Relief hit him like a punch. He took a step forward. She lifted her head. Her visor lit faintly from within. An Arg froze. Her eyes glowed bright, brighter than his own ever had. Too bright. The voice spoke again, everywhere at once. Clarity is the measure. The figure tilted its head, the movement unnatural, too smooth. Arg's heart hammered. He took another step, then stopped cold. His breath caught. The light from her visor didn't reflect on the floor. It wasn't Kara. It was bait. He forced his fists to unclench, his throat dry. Not this time, he muttered. The figure dissolved, peeling away into light and ash, scattering into the walls. The chamber pulsed once in response. Arg staggered slightly, bracing himself. His lungs burned, his chest tight, but he held his ground. The voice spoke again. Proceed. A new corridor split open in the wall, glowing faintly. Arg swallowed hard, forcing his legs forward. His vision blurred, but he didn't slow. The trial wasn't trying to break his body yet. It was trying to break his sight, and he wasn't going to let it. Chapter 5. Kara's Illusions. The silence swallowed her. Kara had always thought she could endure silence. The hub's conference decks, where men raised their voices until compromise cracked. She had lived in that noise. The Dust Widow's narrow galley, where recycled air hummed in metal lungs. She had lived in that too. Silence was different, though. Silence had always been her ally. But not here. Here, the silence was alive. It pressed against her visor, filled her ears, seeped into her skin like cold oil. It wasn't empty. It was watching. The wall had cut her off from Arg without warning. Black surface folding like a curtain of liquid stone. One moment, his voice filled her comms, raw with anger and fear, shouting her name. The next, nothing. She hadn't even had time to shout back. Now there was only the chamber, endless black walls crawling faintly with pale light, bending wrong around her visor's edges. She could feel the seed's resonance under her boots, pulsing faintly. Every beat was a reminder. She was not here by choice. She was here because something demanded it. Clarity is the measure. The words still rattled through her bones. Kara steadied her breath. She had survived Helix corporate contracts. She had survived starvation on half rations in the belt. She had survived the hub's politics and the Dust Widow's storms. She could survive this. But she didn't know if she could survive it alone. The corridor ahead of her split into two, both paths bent in unnatural arcs, angles that didn't make sense, the walls warping as though they had been carved out of memory instead of stone. Her visor flickered with conflicting readings. Left, distance 30 meters. Right, distance infinite. Both numbers shifted again before she finished blinking. She cursed under her breath. Arg would have hated this. But Arg wasn't here. The thought cut sharper than she expected. Don't, she muttered, forcing her boots forward. Don't think about him. One step at a time. She chose left. Not because it looked safer. None of them did. But because her body leaned that way before her mind could argue. Instinct. The corridor swallowed her. The walls whispered. Not with words at first, but with impressions. Pressure against her skull, as though her thoughts were no longer her own. Kara clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms through the gloves, and walked faster. The whispers sharpened. You think he'll stay? Her heart jumped. The voice wasn't hers. It wasn't Arg's. It was something in between. A hybrid of memory and nightmare. She kept walking. He'll leave. He always leaves. He left before. He'll leave again. Her throat tightened. She forced out a breath. Not real. The corridor rippled faintly. Shadows stretched on the walls. Shapes too human to be coincidence. One stepped forward. Kara's breath hitched. It was Arg. Or it looked like him. His height, his stance, the way his shoulders hunched forward, defensive but stubborn. His visor glowed faintly, but his body was all silhouette, cut from the wall itself. Kara, the shadow Arg said. Her stomach dropped. No, she whispered. You're not him. He stepped closer. You think I'll stay? You think I'll carry this forever? I've carried too much already. Her chest constricted. The words stabbed too close to truth. She'd heard Arg say things not far from that. Not about her, not directly, but about life in the belt. About the orphans, about burdens too heavy to shoulder. The shadow leaned closer. Its voice sharpened. When the trial's done, I'll walk away. like I always do, and you'll be alone. Kara's throat burned. She knew it wasn't Arg. She knew it. But hearing the words in his shape, in his stance, it cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Her hands shook. You're not him. Don't fool yourself. She shut her eyes, forcing her breath to steady. Not him, she repeated louder this time. Not him. When she opened her eyes, the shadow was gone. Only the corridor remained, bending endlessly ahead. Her knees felt weak, but she kept walking. The second chamber was larger. Its walls were lit faintly, veins of pale blue light crawling like frost. In the center stood figures. Not one, not two, dozens. Kara froze. She recognized them. Faces she'd seen in the hub, foremen and miners, haulers and traders, men and women who had spat words like neutral at her as if it were an insult. The crowd filled the chamber wall to wall, a mockery of a gathering she once stood before. Their eyes glowed faintly like the seed's fragments. They turned toward her in unison. The whispers came sharp now, too many voices at once. You think you're one of us? You think you built something? We'll tear it down the moment you leave. No one follows you. No one trusts you. You're nothing. Kara's spine stiffened. Her breathing came faster, sharper, echoing loud in her helmet. She forced herself to look at them, all of them, and every face she recognized. Men she had argued with, women who had mocked her behind closed doors, people who had looked through her as if she wasn't there. Her greatest fear wasn't storms, wasn't starvation. It was being unseen, useless, abandoned. No, she said softly. The voices roared louder, overlapping, crashing together until her head throbbed. Alone, always alone. She dropped to one knee. Her hands clutched her helmet. The sound was too much, too close, clawing at her like knives. No, she screamed. The chamber trembled. The figures rippled, their outlines stuttering. She forced her hands down. She stood, legs shaking, chest heaving. You're not real, none of you. I've seen your faces. I've heard your voices. But you don't matter. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. I matter. I built something with him, with all of them, and you can't take that from me. The voices faltered. The crowd dissolved, peeling away into ash and smoke until the chamber was empty again. Only her voice echoed, small and raw. She sagged against the wall, her body trembling. Tears burned hot in her eyes. But she was still standing. The chamber pulsed once more. Clarity is the measure. The words filled her bones, but this time they didn't crush. She steadied her breath. She understood. The trial wasn't just about what she saw. It was about what she believed. Illusions had teeth. They could cut as deep as truth. But clarity meant knowing the difference. She pushed herself upright again. Her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. Another corridor opened ahead, glowing faintly. She walked toward it, her steps slow but steady. For the first time since the wall had cut her off from Arg, she didn't feel entirely powerless. She wasn't free. She wasn't safe. But she was not broken, and the trial would not break her. The end of Part 1 of Void Miner, Trial of the Century.